get a
It's already been a long day.
Good morning, City Council and City team members. So this is our budget retreat. This is our time where we have a full day together to go through significant detail in the proposed budget. We have all the department heads on the call. Keith and I are in the same room, but everyone else is remote in various locations. We all know that this format is less than ideal, and the richness of the conversations that we have in person are a challenge, and we'll be here all day. So let's all try and make the best of this new normal in the format. We also have, I noticed, a number of our managers and supervisors from across the city attending this meeting remotely. Some of them may be on for most of the day. Others will pop in and out as their departments are talked about. And so I want to recognize them and thank them as well. So Keith, if we can start advancing. Okay, the budget is the key to the city. If you want to know what the city cares about, look at where we allocate our money. Few simple rules, and these are a repeat from last year. You know, of course, we want to respect everybody. Important, let's look forward, not behind. But also, like last night, ask questions, ask questions, ask questions. This is the format where we have the people here that do the day-to-day operations of the city. And this format allows us to be a little bit more informal. And so let's take advantage of that, and we truly want to answer your questions. And next slide. Our goals for today is we want you to depart this virtual room with a keyboard. Technical difficulties. We want to depart this room with a deeper understanding of the city's operating budget. We're talking about the capital budget, remember, on June 11th. We want you to depart this room with knowledge of not just the immediate, but the long-term challenges facing the city, both general fund and enterprise. But we also want you to be empowered to articulate our challenges when you're at the grocery store or 6 feet on the front lawn away from your neighbor, talking about the challenges that are facing our city. And we also want you as elected officials to be satisfied that your questions were satisfactorily answered, or have the confidence that we will address those questions through our next session. And our next session on the budget here will be on June 9th. We do have a strategic initiative meeting scheduled for June 4th, but the next time we're talking through and going through this detailed budget will be June 9th. I will say that I think some of you guys saw the length of our PowerPoint slide deck today. Those slides also include the capital budget slides that we have already prepared and we'll be talking about on June 9th. And so the slide deck does not go to 300, it goes just over 200. But that includes a number of slides from the various departments that we'll talk today as well. Next slide. The agenda, we'll start by reviewing the proposed deficit. We will then turn it over to Keith to go over our expenditures, reserves, and position summary. We will then also talk about the very few enhancements that are included within the proposed budget. And then we'll go through operating departments, enterprise departments, and internal service funds, and have additional time for questions and answers. Now, we have included a detailed schedule for today. The first page of that is up on the screen now. And so just about 10 minutes for this intro, looks like we're on track. And then we will step through the day as shown, with the bulk of the time allocated for the individual department presentations, beginning at 11:15 going through 2:30 with a break between 12 and 1. You have to get your own lunch because we're virtual, so whatever is in your home refrigerator, good luck. Then later today, next slide, we will take a break from 2:30 to 2:45, where we will then talk about our enterprise funds, and there are 4 funds here that we will talk about: water, wastewater, stormwater, and CityNet. Then we will talk about internal service funds, and when we get to that section, we'll give a better definition of what internal service funds are. But there are four funds that make up that. It's our central garage, our building and facilities, our technology, and our self-insurance. And then we've allocated about 30 minutes for time for additional questions. What's also important to say at the outset is that this is a lot of information. And it's important that we go at the appropriate pace to answer your questions as policymakers for this organization, so you have a knowledge of really what underpins the several hundred pages that make up our adopted budget. And so while we have outlined the timing and schedule for today, what we also have is a little time on June 9th to get through any presentations that we didn't get through today. So it's my hope, and I think all of our hopes, that we don't have to do that, and we can really reserve June 9th, which is also a regular council meeting day, to respond to any questions that we can't respond to today. But if we sort of need more time, we have built in that flexibility. So without further ado, let's begin the process. And just to give an overview of what we talked about last night, we'll not step through the proposed budget and the strategies in detail, but as for some reason, we have a little latency when we advance the slide. You know what, I wonder if the slide deck is not saved to the desktop and it's instead operating off the jump drive. Just 1 second.
I believe that Steve saved it to the desktop, but that's how we tested it earlier.
Okay, it's a little delayed. It's probably the size of the computer that's connected to the screen and the size of the slide deck. Okay, so let's try and deal with that. And Keith, why don't you just advance a little sort of before I get to the point? Okay. So all in, as an organization, we're a $180 million organization, as we talked about last night. That is all funds, including internal service funds. Our general fund is just under $50 million at $49 million. That represents a decrease from the prior year, as we showed last night, and we'll show again today. 265 FTEs and 802 capital improvement projects. General fund deficit revenues are projected to be $45.2 million, with expenditures at 53.4, leaving us with a deficit of $8.2 million. As we talked about last night, approximately half of that deficit is COVID-19 related. The other half is personnel costs, including both salaries, COLA increases, CalPERS increases, and other contracts and services that are increasing outside of our control. A good example of that is our animal services contract that we'll talk a little bit about today with the county, that increased by $200,000, and that's in our police department. So next slide. And so we'll turn it over now to Keith to talk about our general fund overview.
Good morning, honorable mayor, members of the city council. Keith Martini, your finance director.
What we'll do is, at each transition slide, we want to pause for questions on the prior section. So if you have questions, feel free to ask. If not, we'll keep rolling at the appropriate cadence.
Okay, first, before I continue, can you hear me?
I got a question, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I saw it. Yes, the answer to you is Keith. Yes, we can hear you. And Marty had his hand up.
Mr. Mayor, I don't know how easy it is is it easier for us to raise our hands through the app, or to do something like this? Are you seeing this, or what's the best way for you?
I can see you doing that, but when he's sharing the screen, I don't see all of you. So right now I do have the participants, and that's where I saw your hand. So I guess for now, let's do hand, and then if we have an open dialogue where there's the whole picture that we see each other, then like you said, I think that would be faster, like you said.
All right. So it would be great to have the $3.9 million increases broken down showing the health benefits, the wages, all of the components of that 3.9 million. I think that would be helpful for me and the public to understand where these costs are increasing, and those are outside of some of those are outside of our control.
That's a valid point. The other thing, Marty, just in thinking what you said, maybe what I can do is just go to each member after the pause to see if they have any questions.
That sounds good.
List, and then we don't have to worry about the hands in that.
Got it.
Okay.
So yeah, that would be beneficial for at a later time to present that information to show a breakdown on what those $3.9 million are. Thank you.
And I know we have that, and we will provide it.
Okay. So this slide shows. Okay, so this slide shows a summary of the city's general fund expenditures by major functional area, showing general government, which constitutes the city manager's office, city attorney, human resources, finance, all the support administrative functions that operate the city. Moving on to police and fire and public works, and then community and economic development and community services. And as you can see here, the 2021 proposed budget has total expenditures at just over $49 million, which is actually about $1.4 million lower than the current fiscal year adopted budget. So that's about a 3% decrease in overall general fund expenditures year over year. And you can see where the largest decreases are expected to occur, primarily in general government, police, and as well as community and economic development and community services. All of the budget balancing strategies that are being proposed in this budget have been incorporated into each department's operating budget. So you'll see the reductions from some of the positions that are proposed to be held vacant embedded in each of these departments. Okay. So the next slide, on slide 86, shows just a high-level bulleted list of some of the major pressures on the city's expenditures, most of which is incurred in the general fund. Most of our, all of our unions, our bargaining units, will be up for negotiation in this upcoming fiscal year, and so there'll be some additional pressure through labor negotiations. There's also rising personnel costs, primarily from our pension system, participating in CalPERS, as well as our health insurance costs. County election costs are rather substantial as well, and those have been folded into the city clerk's office. Many of the city's contracts have CPI or consumer price index increases built into the terms and conditions of those contracts. Those have been incorporated. Any ongoing IT software maintenance needs or any mandates that are required by law for us to adhere to. An example of that is the Americans with Disabilities Act, any ADA requirements and enhancements. That work has been folded into the proposed budget as well. This next slide, slide 87, just shows a list of the bargaining units here in the city of San Bruno, how many members are in each, and it shows the expiration date for these contracts. And as I mentioned, as city manager mentioned before, many of these bargaining units will be up for negotiation in the upcoming fiscal year, and so there'll be quite a lot of work being done to negotiate contracts with these bargaining units. I do want to step through in a little bit of detail in regards to the pension increases that have been built into the proposed 2021 budget. In total, there's just over $10 million that the city pays PERS on an annual basis that will be paid in the upcoming fiscal year. $4.2 million of that is paid to PERS through our biweekly payroll contribution for what's called our normal costs for participation for our members in CalPERS. The remaining $6 million of that is an annual contribution that the city makes as our annual contribution for the unfunded actuarial liability, or it's called our UAL. And that is an amount that we pay annually once a year up front. And we are able to take advantage of doing that, so we don't have to pay as much if we were to break up that payment throughout the entire fiscal year.
Can I pause there real quick? Because I want to make sure that council understands what normal cost is and the difference between normal cost and the unfunded liability. And so our charge from CalPERS is broken down in these two components. And what the normal cost is the portion of the benefit that I'm earning for my service this year. So it's charged out on biweekly payroll. So those 80 hours that I work, a percent of my compensation that the city pays goes to pay for the retirement benefit that I'm earning for those 80 hours paid biweekly. In addition to that, there's the $6 million that is our unfunded liability. And that has built up over time due to both benefit increases, investment losses on CalPERS, and we have to fund that unfunded actuarial liability. And we've had prior slides that demonstrated to council the curve of that unfunded liability that over a 30-year horizon we will pay off. And so we always say, think about that portion as the mortgage, where we have to pay down that unfunded liability, but after 30 years it will be paid off. And we will only be paying our normal costs. And so we are sort of in this predicament like many other cities in the state of California, nearly all, not every city, because some cities are well-heeled where they have been able to pay off their unfunded liability. But the vast majority of cities have an unfunded liability portion, a UAL, as well as they're paying the portion of the benefits that employees accrue essentially for every hour, every biweekly payroll cycle.
Okay, before we move on from the pension costs, we have two hands up. Laura and then Linda, please.
So on that point, Javon, on the unfunded liability, that number is just going to continue to grow. I mean, that's a scary number because with COVID and, we know how we got into this place, and they expect a 7% return on investments and they're losing annually. They're getting a, negative 3%. And, that's where this is coming from. So this number is scary. And, that just goes back to how we can't, I don't know. I just don't have answers to this. I think this is a sinking ship.
Linda? Let's go to Linda first, and then we'll go back to you, Javon. She can answer both.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, are we going to go further into this? Because I remember from last year's presentation, you provided the comparisons with other cities, and San Bruno was, I thought, a little bit better off than other cities in our contributions. And I just wanted to know if we're going to delve into this a little bit further today.
Sure. There's another slide, so let's go to that, and then we'll respond.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this slide, there's two graphs on this slide. The slide on the left shows the unfunded PERS pension liability for the city of San Bruno and a trend over the prior 7 or 8 years. And it does show that there is some growth year over year for the city's unfunded PERS pension liability. This is a sort of a look back in time at what it has been. And as Javon indicated earlier, is that we have a plan to pay this off over time, similar to like your mortgage payment on your own home. And so this amount, this bar chart will actually go down gradually year over year as we continue to pay down that unfunded pension liability. This graph on the right shows 2 data points. And what it shows is the line represents the employer's contribution rate. And so that's the city's rate that we have to pay CalPERS in proportion to total payments made. The bars represent the dollar amount of the city's employer contribution. And as you can see in 2021, it's projected to grow as it's been growing over the past few years. But you can see that the bar charts actually do show a leveling off. And it shows a leveling off of the amount that we have to make to PERS on an annual basis. And then as we move into the out years beyond fiscal year 25-26, that amount will actually start to decline a little bit. We don't have data in our actuarial reports to provide at this time, but that is the trend in which this is going.
Right.
But to go back to, I think, Laura's question, yes, if due to COVID or any economic circumstance, CalPERS loses money, they may increase employer contribution rates. They may also reduce their discount rate, which is the rate they expect to earn on their investments, which will in turn increase the amount that they need to recover from employers. And so, yes, it is possible over time that these costs will go up, but Keith is exactly right. Over the long horizon, the 30-year cycle, the plan is to pay off the unfunded liability and only be paying that normal cost. I think the other overarching point that we haven't touched on, but that's important to say because you will hear, oh, well, there's a new lower retirement tier. There are PEPRA employees, people that started in government after January 1, 2017, have a lower CalPERS retirement tier. CalPERS does not charge employers right now two separate rates for a PEPRA employee or a classic employee. What we're charged is a composite rate. And so when you see our CalPERS rate, that is already reflecting an analysis of how many PEPRA employees we have compared to how many classic employees we have. And so oftentimes you may hear, well, if I'm a PEPRA employee, my retirement benefit is less, thus I'm getting less than a classic employee. Unfortunately, that's not reflected in our costs because our CalPERS charge is the same for every employee, whether you're PEPRA or classic.
And then Linda had a comment, and then Marty has his hand up. And then Linda and Laura, if you can bring your hands down, because I think unless you have questions again. Thanks. Marty?
Yes, thank you. It's probably predictable that we will see an increase in those costs because CalPERS is not going to make the money that they are anticipating. So knowing that and seeing how the unfunded liability took a pretty big jump, it's just something to be aware of. And the solution, or what does staff think that can be done to assist with that, to reduce those pension costs, or to deal with that liability that just, I'm staring at that graph and I can't imagine what it's going to look like next year. So I'm just interested in hearing from staff a little bit about that and being aware of that.
Yeah. So the honest answer is that there are not a lot of options to reduce this cost. One strategy is to set up a trust to pre-fund your unfunded liability payments or to set money aside. That takes more, as we are a resource-strained organization. We need to grow our revenues, have economic development. And those cities that have been able to sort of effectively address their unfunded liability have the financial wherewithal to pay that down, so they're not essentially, as costs increase each year, making a decision on using their growth in revenues to pay for added pension costs versus added services or added road maintenance, for example. Because we're a resource-strained organization, these added costs come at the detriment of additional services, additional facility maintenance. And so part of the solution is growing our base, growing our revenues. The other way to reduce pension costs is to reduce your employee count. That's a very challenging thing for this organization because we're very leanly staffed. And we had a little bit of that conversation yesterday. And so, unfortunately, this is one of those items where there is not a lot of discretion available to policymakers or managers. And that's why you have a number of groups, including the city managers group and the Finance Officers Association that really essentially lobby CalPERS to, when they make policy decisions, really think about how that impacts services on a day-to-day basis for municipalities like us, because they absolutely have an immediate impact on your ability to budget and provide.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, Marty, I was on mute.
Yeah, I saw that. So when we get to comparisons with other cities, will you be able to share what those bargaining agreement percentages of contributions of other cities' employees are compared to San Bruno?
Yeah, we don't have that in the slide deck, but it is a slide that we have prepared for a prior presentation. We will bring that back, and we can show that on June 9th. And the answer is similar to how you're remembering, which is our percentage is lower than other municipalities, and I can't remember what the comparison was, but we are not on the higher end for our CalPERS percentage rates, and that relates to really what our classic tier was, frankly, from the .com bust forward, because that's when the unfunded liability really generated and started with when the .com bust of the early 2000s. So.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands up at this time on the topic of pension costs, so we'll go into reserves.
Okay, so now moving on to section 3 of today's agenda is about the city's reserves. And so I wanted to step through, I'm on slide 91, what are the major components of the city's general fund associated reserves. And this slide shows what the estimated ending fund balance is in the current fiscal year, 1920, and what is projected to be the ending fund balance in fiscal year 2021. Back in 2013, the City Council did adopt a reserve policy that set targets for each of these reserves. So I want to step through each one of them so that everyone's on the same page. So for the city's general fund, the reserve policy sets a target of having a $1.5 million ending fund balance in the fund by the end of the year. And as you can see, we're expected to just meet that by the end of this current year. However, we are expected to dip into the fund balance in order to balance the budget in 2021, bringing us down to an ending fund balance of $1 million. The next item, which is our most robust reserve, it's the general fund reserve. It's a separate fund that we have set up, and the dollar amount in that fund, the target set by the policy, is to have 25% of the city's general fund annual operating expenditure budget in that reserve. And by the end of the fiscal year, in this current year, we will have met that target. However, one of the budget balancing strategies presented last night is to tap into that reserve and use a little less than $600,000 of it in order to balance the general fund budget. So again, on this one as well, we will be falling short of the reserve target in the 2021 budget. The next reserve is our general fund capital reserve. And this fund is used to fund capital improvement projects in and around the city. And the reserve policy sets a target of having at least $5 million in the fund at any point in time. And as you can see, the estimated balance at the end of the current year is just over $5 million. But unfortunately, there are a few projects that are requiring the use of this fund in the proposed budget, which will bring it just below the ending fund balance target at $4.9 million. And I will say that staff worked really hard on identifying the projects that could take advantage of alternative funding sources, which was discussed at a high level last night and will be discussed in more detail in the CIP section in early June. The final reserve target is our Emergency Disaster Reserve Fund. And the target set for that fund is to have $3 million set aside in it. As council is aware, there was a need to tap into that fund this current fiscal year due to the Crestmore slope stability project that required the use of that fund. And then we are also tapping into that fund as it relates to the COVID-19 response effort. we don't anticipate to have much change in that fund by the end of the fiscal year. If we do get reimbursement from FEMA as it relates to COVID-19 or any potential reimbursement from the slope stability project, we will be able to replenish the reserve balance in that fund. So overall, you'll see that the reserves by the end of the year, next year, about 19.9 million, which is just a little bit lower than we expect to be by the end of this current fiscal year.
Keith, before we move over to the cash balances, Laura, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, if this is not an emergency and unprecedented time to start using some of these general reserves, I think there is no better time, number one. And then number two, really this goes to, I guess, Mayor, for you, because you've been on longer than anybody. Are these numbers good compared to years in the past, and especially in those dire years in terms of the fund balances?
Well, I mean, I think the finance director may have the more specific answer, but I'm thinking back when when I first started on the council and what type of reserves. You didn't have the emergency disaster fund, obviously, and there was no policy. I think the policy was set back in 2013 to actually have a line base. But prior to that, my memory says we almost had nothing in reserves, minimal. And what made me think about that was when there was the slide up around Crestmore and a couple homes had to be bought by the city during that, and we didn't have barely anything there in order to go to in an emergency, and that was minor opposed to what we've faced today. But the finance director may know the history as far as the total dollars, but we can get that.
Yes, so that's correct, Mr. Mayor. And so after council took the action back in 2013 that set these rather aggressive and conservative targets for the city to meet as in regards to its reserves, it was not meeting it at that time. And through actions of city council and the adoption of the annual budget process, the city gradually increased its reserve balances across all of these reserve funds. And the city actually met each of them, each of the targets set in the policy just a few years ago, and we have met them ever since. So the 2021 proposed budget will be new for the city, and where we are actually planning to tap into the general fund reserve in order to balance the budget.
Okay, and let me expound upon that, because I think it's important to note that San Bruno has been fiscally constrained for quite some time. And the allocation of money to these reserves, outside of the general fund reserve, largely came from PG&E. So it was the PG&E, money from PG&E that established the $3 million emergency reserve directed by council. It was another $6 million from PG&E that went to build up the capital equipment reserve. And so one of sort of the top line summaries for me is that if not for money from PG&E, we would not have a general fund capital reserve that has $5 million in it, nor an emergency disaster reserve fund that has $3 million in it. And so it's sort of the legacy of being fiscally constrained and needing to grow our revenue base. And then while we are meeting the policy target, as we'll see on the next slide, when we talk about available cash, as in, what is the balance sheet, the $13 million that has been used by the city net department essentially evaporates that 25% general fund reserve that should be $12 million. And so when you look at your net available cash, you have to pull together money in other funds to come up to the 9.7 million. And so when we sort of say at a high level that the city has limited available cash, or the general fund reserve has essentially been used as a cable department loan, this is the background of that. And I'm going to shut up now and let Keith talk.
Hold on, we have some hands up. We have Marty.
I'm sorry, I wasn't done. I had another question.
Apologize. Go ahead, Laura.
Okay, sorry. I thought you called me Joyce. So yeah, I mean, I think the sad thing about this is that the city of San Bruno has been limping along for many years when you look around us and you have surrounding cities that are, you know, Burlingame and San Mateo and San Carlos, and they have, you know, these high additional funds that they can stock away for funds like this. We can't, and we've continued to every year figure out how we're going to balance the budget and what we're going to cut back and what we're going to delay, and don't hire that position even though it got approved. So I guess the question is, and you know, maybe, you know, we don't have an answer, and I know we don't have this answer today, but you know, put COVID aside, we still are struggling. And you know, I guess I would say there's something that we're not doing. And if you go back and look at Google Maps, and you go back 30 years ago and you drive down El Camino on Google Maps, you're going to see the same thing you did 30 years ago that you see today. And that is development. And you know, if we can't approve development and we can't increase height limits in areas, and Measure N was a big part of that, what are other choices? We just contract everything out. We contract our police out. We contract our fire out. We can't sustain employees, because who wants to work for a city that can't balance their budgets, or that struggle to balance their budgets, knowing that, I might be furloughed, knowing I might not get a pay raise. So, I mean, I got to say, if I'm a city employee right now, that I'd be concerned. And council has the authority to make changes and to support development and to support the programs that can bring funds into our city and be like a lot of the flourishing cities around us, so that we can be sustainable.
Marty, then Linda.
So we have this reserve program that didn't exist 20 years ago. We have a target of 25. The first part of Laura's comment, I agree with, that the questioning is, when do you use these reserves? And, you know, people call them rainy day funds. Well, it's storming right now. And we are burdened with decisions from the past, and looking at the very first or second slide, we're not supposed to look back too much today, but that's a fact. So getting back on my point, being that using these reserves and reducing it, instead of, say, from 25 to 20, which would be about 2.4 million, that's an option that we have as a council, that you tap into your reserves when you really, really need them. I just seeing that point right now, and as we're looking at these cash balances, it's something to consider. So I just wanted to leave that out there.
Linda?
Yeah, I just, so I had a question, just more kind of high level, I would say. The two slides before this, in regards to the policies that the council has approved, what happens when we go under? Are those just best practices, which I agree with? I don't have an issue with the policies in and of themselves, but we go under these numbers that have been established. Are there any repercussions to that?
No, these are all city council adopted policies, and so there are no repercussions from outside agencies. What the repercussion is not having the available cash on hand if an emergency happens, or if a capital expenditure is needed. As far as the policy targets, the analysis into how much your reserve account should be is a very detailed and complicated one. I think at a high level, the policies that we have now are not bad policies, and if we had all of that available in cash, I think we'd be fine. We would still be sort of depressed on the general fund capital reserve, because we know our capital needs and the need to replace Fire Station 52 and all of that. But if we were sort of if this money was available in cash and we didn't have the cable net loan and we had growing revenues, you could bond for some of your capital improvement projects and pay those over time.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge right now is there's not the available cash. As far as the general fund reserve, GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, represents or recommends a minimum of 2 months operating expenditures, which is 16.66%, or virtually 17%. But that's a minimum that every city should have, and you should really look at the volatility of your individual revenue sources to determine how much above that 17% you need to go. And so this city, for various reasons, decided 25%. And we undertook an analysis to say, should that be higher or lower? I think our biggest challenge right now is that it's not there in available cash. And so it is a great policy, but it's not there in cash.
Okay. And I guess as we go through this, just something to think about is I don't know to the extent I would disagree with what Marty said a moment ago. I don't think it's storming yet. I think it's really bad right now, but I know it's really bad. Marty, I see your face. But you know, JCPenney has filed for bankruptcy. We don't know what's going to happen with the stores and the shops that are in San Fran right now. I have received emails from small businesses up and down San Mateo Avenue saying another month they just can't afford it. They're going to have to close. So I think that the real repercussions of COVID-19 aren't going to be really realized nationally, maybe even internationally, for another year or so. And so my concern is it sounds like we're at capacity with staff. What does happen? I mean, what is bankruptcy the only option if we don't have any cash left in our reserves?
Okay, so you use the B word, which we never use.
Oh, sorry. That was not part of my council training. Sorry.
So we can talk. Is San Bruno near bankruptcy? Absolutely not.
Okay.
I sort of have the unfortunate history of having helped out two cities.
You've lived it, Javon, so you know what bankruptcy is and what it isn't.
Right. Yes, that's why it's a good resource for us.
We're not there. You don't want to go there. It's extremely terrible. You have to make very, very horrible decisions. What I'll say about that is we have Measure G, which is if we ever get to that point, we actually have a lifeline that has more available cash to the city to help save off something like that. In addition, one of the things that bankruptcy.
Hold on, ma'am.
And when you were framing that, consultant, the first thing we did is we went in and we found where the available cash was, and we had to reserve cash to go through the bankruptcy process and to pay the lawyers and the consultants, and that was several $1 million. And so you can't wait until you have no money to say you file for bankruptcy, because that process costs, right? And in Stockton, it cost them over $8 million. And so we're not there, and we actually have amazing avenues toward successful recovery and sustainability. One of them is Mills Park that has a community benefit payment of $10 million. Now, we have to get that across the finish line and get the development to a point where the council feels that it's appropriate for the community. But that's one project that, if a portion of that is allocated to these reserves, makes us a heck of a lot more healthy organization. And so there are avenues, but the available cash that we have now, that on the next slide is $9.7 million. I think if we want to put that in context, we know right now that we had to pull $1 million out of our reserve this year for two unexpected things: the slide and COVID-19. We know that we have a $1.5 million capital improvement project in Spyglass because we're sandbagging two homes because of an undersized stormwater system where the fund is projected to go negative. That's $1.5 million.
And it's possible we're going to be getting maybe some emergency money from the legislatures. Is that right? I know it's a possibility, but
absolutely. So we are very much tracking that. So that the HEROES Act that has been proposed by the Democrats and passed the House and now is at the Senate. If it's passed, it's a $3 trillion bill. It would provide significant money to San Mateo County and the city of San Bruno. The first version of that will undoubtedly be changed if anything gets passed, has $14 million coming to the city of San Bruno. If that happens, that solves a ton of our problems. I think that most people are expecting that bill to have significant reductions because it was passed with only the support of the Democrats in the House, and right now there's a significant disagreement between the Democrats and Republicans about any third stimulus package and whether any amount in that stimulus package goes to state and local governments. And so, unfortunately, we don't have we are paying attention, but our fiscal reality is such that, we can't just burn our reserves to cover our $8.2 million hole, because the total reserve balance, once we include everything we have in our emergency reserve, everything we have set aside for equipment, everything we have set aside in our fund balance, and everything we have set aside in our capital reserve is only not $9.7 million. Right? We don't have that luxury to say, we have an $8.2 million hole, let's pull even half of that from reserves. And so we're forced with the unfortunate situation where we have to make immediate cuts to the budget and defund capital projects because we need to have cash available to protect this organization and the community.
Thanks, Linda. And let's be candid. You're talking about the Senate and the House working together and the president signing off. And we all of us electeds received what the possibilities were for potential receiving from DC. And we know that's not going to be reality. And until it's in the bank and it's coming our way, then we're going to have to look at the hard facts and make the tough decisions. Let's go ahead and continue to move on, Siobhan and Keith.
So the next slide, slide 93, is I want to focus just a few slides on the general fund capital reserve, which is one of the funds that has a target set in the city's reserve policy. And what this slide shows is our general fund capital reserve as the first line on this table. But what we also showed on this slide is I wanted to list and articulate what are the other funding sources available to implement capital improvement projects. And those are listed here. I mentioned last night that with the adoption of the Comprehensive Development Impact Fee program, that should generate substantial revenue in the out years when larger development projects are actually implemented. Right now, there's a little bit of money coming in, but that is an available pot of money that we will be able to leverage in the future. Other than that, there is gas tax, which is money coming from the state for a tax on gasoline sale. And then Measure A and Measure W, which are county measures that were adopted by the voters that go towards street and sidewalk maintenance and transportation projects. And the major takeaway that I want to talk about with council on this slide is that staff work very hard to ensure that we are leveraging all of these available funding sources to implement many of the capital projects that you'll see in the CIP program in the next couple of weeks, so that we can leverage them to reduce the burden on using the general fund capital reserve in the 2021 proposed budget.
Yeah. And if I can just add before questions, I want to point out to the city council that the total on this slide is $6 million for 2021. I just want to point out that the general fund capital reserve
are you still on?
I just want to point out the general fund capital reserve number 4.9 was actually included in the prior number. So I don't want anyone to take the 9.7 from the prior slide, add that to 6 million and say, oh wow, that's 15 million. This table shows capital funds, and so we included the capital reserve amount that was already captured in those prior numbers. So I think that's just an important point that I want you guys to realize.
The other thing on this slide is there's the column called type. We have two different types, unrestricted and restricted. The general fund capital reserve, it's really the discretion of the city council to determine which capital projects you want to use that money on. The other funding sources have a variety of restrictions on how we can actually allocate that money. Measure A, for example, you can only use that money on street and sidewalk capital projects. You cannot use it for any other type of capital improvement. And so we have to be very careful and strategic about how we program those funds for capital improvements.
Yeah.
So the next slide, again, part of our 5-year financial forecast process is to forecast out the major funds for the city. And this is what the 5-year financial forecast looks like for the general fund capital reserve fund. Again, it has a projected ending balance of about $4.9 million at the end of 2021. The large spike that you see in the expenditures is that project that Javon spoke about earlier, is the Spyglass project in the Stormwater Enterprise Fund. That's a project that's about $1.5 million. There is no other funding source at this time to implement that project. And at this time, staff was not able to present appropriating that money to you in the 2021 budget because it would deplete a significant portion of the fund balance. And so right now, it's pushed into the 21-22 forecast period, and that's why you see the spike there. And if we were to implement this project using general fund reserves, it would drop the balance down to below $3 million, which is substantially below the target set in the reserve policy. And the other noteworthy thing on this slide, there is no ongoing revenue stream into the general fund capital reserve. We have no programmed revenue going into the fund. What we have in the fund is what we have to use to implement capital improvements.
Right. And said another way, when we were having our department meetings, this information crystallized for me is we really don't have a general fund capital reserve. We can't afford to allocate any money to projects, really. And so we have to rely on Measure G. And I say that we don't have a general fund capital reserve because of the cable loan. We don't have a general fund reserve. And so our capital reserve is essentially a general fund reserve. And so any dollar we take away from our capital reserve to do a project is actually more money coming out of our reserve account that we're not going to have if we have further reductions or a road fails or a building collapse or there's an earthquake. And so given our financial situation, at least in my mind and what I articulated to our staff, is we don't have a general fund capital projects. If we're approving a capital project, it has to almost be a dire need and emergency because we don't have a general fund reserve because there's the cash has been used in the cable loan.
Okay. Let's just pause for a second. Michael.
Yeah, so this slide is actually a little confusing to me because my understanding of the whole purpose of having that capital reserve is that we would build up money so that during every fiscal year we would have the ability to do some sort of a capital project. So if we have, a little, I'm not sure which axis is the one I'm looking at. It's like 1 million on one side, 2.5 million on the other side. So we have that money sitting there, but we have nothing coming in or going out. Why would we just let that money sit there then if there are some projects that need to get done? For this particular one, I don't see this fund as the same as those emergency funds where we keep that money there for the rainy day. This really should be working capital for us. Why would we just let it sit there?
It would be working capital if you had a general fund reserve. If we go back a couple slides, this is an extremely important point, so it's worth going back. And we have some latency. But of that $19 million, right now includes the $4.9 million in the general fund capital reserve. When you take out the fiscal net, the city net loan, and do the math of just the available cash we have, it's 9.7 million. And so any capital money you spend is coming from essentially the pot of cash that you have if there's an earthquake, if a road fails, if COVID-19 is more pronounced and severe, if we have higher revenue shortfalls and a mid-year revenue shortfall. In a normal sense, when you have a general fund reserve, absolutely, whatever you have in your capital improvement reserve should be used for capital projects. Right now, we have to make tough decisions because we don't have cash in our reserve account.
I see. So that money is really more of a placeholder than actual funds.
It's a safety net, yeah. It's a safety net. I mean, we essentially have to hold that in abeyance as a safety net.
Okay, thank you.
Linda?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, wouldn't some of the capital projects be projects that would qualify under Measure G funding anyway?
Some of them would, but so I think there are two parts to that question. One is Measure G is at its core a general purpose revenue source that the city council can allocate. It is not a special. It was not approved as a special tax that has legal restrictions on its use. There are community priority goals and council goals for using that money, and the goal is to strive towards using that money absolutely for that for those purposes when possible. So I think that's answer one. Answer two is for road projects, things that sort of were high on those community priorities, absolutely. But there are also projects like the $1.5 million stormwater project that was not in that community priority list. There are other needed improvements in our unmet capital improvement projects. HVAC, roof replacements, things of that nature that sort of didn't bubble to the level when we did the community survey and weren't in those materials that were put out to the community. But when you're in a financial situation like this and you have a HVAC system that needs to be replaced and you have a general pot of money called Measure G, the council may decide that that's an appropriate use of that money.
Thank you.
Okay. Why don't we continue, please?
Okay, so this slide, I'm on slide 95. It just shows the high level beginning fund balance and what are the overall expenditures projected in the general fund capital reserve in 2021 on the far right column, just over $182,000 that will go into detail when we review the capital improvement program budget early in June. And then what the ending fund balance, again, getting us down to the $4.9 million number. The major takeaway on this slide, again, is that the ending fund balance is declining, again, because we have programmed the use of this fund for some really small capital improvement projects that were of very high priority, where there is no other alternative funding source to use. And there really is no dedicated revenue stream going into the fund. As I mentioned earlier, that small amount of revenue is the payback of a prior CityNet Services loan that was made to the CityNet Services enterprise for the use of a capital improvement project. So that comes back into the fund as a small amount of revenue every year. So that's the major takeaway on this slide. Okay, moving on. The next section of today's presentation is to talk about overall positions. I just have a couple high-level slides here to describe the overall position count for the city of San Bruno. There are 265 full-time equivalent positions in the city's 2021 proposed budget at this time. Again, the vast majority of them are under police and fire. As you can see here, 72 for police, 36 for fire, and you can see on the pie chart where all the other remaining FTE counts are dedicated. Many of the other slices on the pie are in regards to the Public Works Department and water, stormwater, wastewater, solid waste, engineering, and streets. This slide here is just a view showing the trend over the prior 3 adopted budget cycles, what the FTE counts have been. And again, not much change. And one thing I'll note here is that in the proposed budget before you, there are a number of positions that are proposed to be held vacant. So those vacant positions are also listed here. And if the position that's presented to be removed, the senior code enforcement officer, we will go ahead and reduce the FTE count by that position if that action is ultimately adopted by the city council. Any questions on the enhancements? I'm sorry, the positions before I turn it over to the enhancements? Okay.
And Linda, you have your hand up, but I think it was from before, so I'm seeing none. Please go ahead. Please go ahead. Keith?
Oh, please go ahead. Okay. So enhancement summary. Given our fiscal condition, you may be asking why are there any enhancements? So the total is $178,000 for a net impact. All of them we think are extremely needed to continue to provide services and make some necessary investments where we think are extremely important. So the first one is a fire department wellness screening. So the department has sought for a number of years now to implement a health screening in compliance with national fire prevention recommendations to provide for early identification of cardiopulmonary cancer and other health concerns, specifically pertaining to firefighters. Scheduling regular cardiac stress tests, blood tests, and physical examinations we know save lives, and it also has the potential to reduce health costs, including workers' compensation, as well as provide the best possible outcomes for our employees. And so in an effort to assist with this, it is a $35,000 request that is not new, but is something that is recommended this year. It did not make it into last year's budget. It is something that at this point, 3 fire chiefs have wanted to accomplish but have not had the financial resources to do. And so that is a recommended enhancement of a new net impact of $35,000 to the general fund. All of these enhancements are incorporated in the proposed budget that is before you. There's a planning and housing intern for this summer of 2020 with a one-time cost of $12,000. That intern would work 40 hours a week during the summer under the direct supervision of our planning and housing manager, and have a specific focus on city-led affordable housing programs in preparation for our next housing element. The city plans to administer our affordable housing program, but has no dedicated staff to work on this, and the effort is a priority. Council may be aware that in our Affordable Housing Trust Fund, we currently have about $3 million that we do not have programmed, and we would like to utilize the services of this intern to help us do some research and think creatively about affordable housing programs that we can implement and utilize with the current available money in that account. In addition, should development be approved for example, with commercial development, there are affordable housing linkage fees, and for the YouTube Bay Hill specific plan, we had those numbers. I don't know them offhand, but several dozen $1 million that could potentially come into this fund over that 20-year horizon. And so while we have a fund balance now, but also planning for the future is important. Housing element. Council knows a lot about the housing element, but we will get our new RHNA, regional housing number allocation in July of 2021. we need to comply with those, and we need to undertake specialized work and extensive community engagement to meet these statutory requirements. This is a new initiative for the 2021 fiscal year. It is a 2-year item, and so there is proposed funding in both this year and will likely come or be included in next year. In the chart, you see new revenue or expense savings of $12,000 because we do have a general plan maintenance fee that developers pay when they have their building permit issued. There's $12,000 in that account, so that decreases the net need, but this is a statutory requirement, and we need to do that. The other item is a needed manager position in our community services department, and that is a park services manager that will be over parks, median maintenance, and trees. This position, fully burdened, costs $157,000. The large portion of this position is planned to be funded by transferring funds from an existing lead maintenance worker position that is currently vacant. And the balance, $43,000, is proposed to be funded by Measure G. Again, one of the things that was high on the priority list of Measure G is maintaining our parks and open space. The city's parks department is responsible for 18 parks, nearly 8 miles of linear medians, 298 acres of open space, fire mitigation, as well as over 7,000 street trees. And we believe that it's appropriate to have this manager over the unit to plan not only the day-to-day work, but preventative maintenance in our parks. And so that comes at a net cost of $43,000, but a significant important need to have the manager over that classification. And Joanne McGreeny is on and can talk and respond to questions there. The next item is to install cabling for the library. It's restricted revenue, $12,000. I think that's going to be paid by the Friends of the Library.
That's correct.
Yeah, so to be paid by the Friends of the Library. Next slide, central garage. So reclassification of the Parks and Facilities Manager position with building and custodial moving to Public Works. That manager position over that unit will be a facilities and garage services manager, a more typical classification out there. The council will remember that we did approve the Parks and Facilities Manager mid-year in the current budget. We went out and had a failed recruitment on that, and with the reallocation, a manager position over both of those units makes sense and frankly more appropriately aligns to what is more commonplace in the market. That position will be split funded by the garage and building and facilities, and because it's already a funded position, it is a net savings of just over $5,000 because we're reducing the classification to align to our maintenance service classification. That is a cross-departmental classification. The next line item is installing of Microsoft Office 360 at a moderate cost of $5,700. Enhancements that were looked at but not included due to our financial condition are information technology upgrades, network security licenses to support our cybersecurity efforts, replacement of our storage area network, GIS mapping and security professional services to develop more accurate maps, desktop and a help desk tool, senior center upgrades for city council meetings, website platform upgrades, shared services, meaning a management analyst, council heard that loud and clear from a number of departments, a street maintenance worker dedicated to pothole repair, and then a central garage mechanic. Jimmy's on. So why don't I have Jimmy talk about that, because unfortunately we did not have the necessary funds to approve the additional garage mechanic, but I do think it's worth the city council hearing the challenges that we're having in our garage. We have 2 garage mechanics. One of the mechanics left to take another job, which left us with one mechanic for most of the year. I believe we had filled that second mechanic position, but unfortunately, what this organization has endured over the last year is the shop being closed over 30, 40 days throughout the year, and no maintenance occurring, and other departments having to support the transport of their vehicles for maintenance. So, Jimmy, if you're on, will you talk a little bit more articulately about that?
Sure, I can. Thank you. Good morning, or actually good afternoon, Mayor, members of the City Council. This position is something that we have requested over the past couple of years, fiscal years, and haven't been able to successfully get the position. I know that there is a burden on the funding, the budget for this, but staff felt that there is a need for additional mechanic. Prior to what I've learned, in the past, there were 3 mechanics on duty at one point, and then with the budget turned down, some of those positions were removed and eliminated, and to 2 mechanics. And since then, the fleet size has increased, and our staff has, been doing the best we can to maintain the city's fleet as well as the equipment that we have to maintain. With that, as the city manager mentioned, if one of the mechanics goes out on leave, it creates a burden, because currently right now, the single mechanic won't be able to, maintain the vehicles that are there that comes into the shop. In addition, we do have, the majority of the vehicles that we service are police cars, and then those needs to go back, for service to go back on the street as soon as we can, so that we don't keep these vehicles, in the shop, for too prolonged a period of time. So initially, also, what we've been doing to try to, have a better customer service for our departments is to also pick up these vehicles for various different departments. So then, our mechanics are also going to, different departments to pick up the vehicles for services, and then having a third mechanic will allow, a person to be on site at all times, to be able to interact with any other issues that comes up from other departments that may have, may drop by. And so with that, we currently, we lost a mechanic a while back ago. We went out for recruitment. We were able to hire one, and it's really, it's hard to find good mechanics these days. So having one mechanic on site was a big burden. And as the city manager mentioned, that we had to close the shop several times, throughout the year, because the person's either on sick leave, or he has pre-planned vacations that he has to take. So anyway, that's all I've got so far. But if you have any questions, both the deputy director Dennis Bosch is online, as well as myself, to be able to answer any questions that you have.
So that's not included in the enhancements, and we can get you more detail on how many days the shop has been closed. But we all get those emails citywide every time the shop is closed. It's a burden, and I know staff looked into alternative service models that unfortunately were either more costly or cities were not able to service our vehicles because they had their own issues. So it is a challenge, and it will continue to be a challenge. But that concludes the enhancements section. Open for questions.
Okay, we do have questions. I wasn't sure how to put my hand up, but real quick, general fund, fire department, wellness screening. Great, understand it. So if somebody were to ask, well, why not police? Why not parks? Why not public works? That's the first question. Second question, Measure G, reclassifying the lead maintenance worker. I understand the reduction, the impact is 43,360. It's stipulated at this time, or suggested, to use Measure G. That's something that I'm wondering about, having a position somewhat, having that paid out of Measure G, and whether that qualifies. And then on the Microsoft Office 365, and of course I'm not the expert here, we have somebody else on the council that is that something in addition, or have we been having that ongoing? Those are my questions.
Sure. Okay, let's take the first one, and I'll toss that to Ari. So Ari, unmute yourself and talk about the wellness and the to fire.
Sure, Mr. Mayor, members of the. Well, go ahead.
Ari, I'm sorry, Chief. Javon, it's not about qualifying the need or the importance. It's about the question we're asked: why is not other public safety or other division? That's my question.
Right, and this is specific to the fire service and the level of carcinogens and nature of that work, and so it's important to sort of have Ari articulate that.
All right, sorry, Chief. Go ahead, Ari.
No problem, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Ari DeLay. So specifically, the firefighter wellness screening is specifically designed to capture the inherent risks of the job of the firefighters. The cancer risk to firefighters is significantly above the day-to-day population that we deal with, and it's a specific job hazard for firefighters. So the concept is to catch those types of illnesses or injuries early on, and those cancers early on, to obviously keep our workforce healthy, and as Jovan spoke of, to potentially decrease the total potential that's out there for workman's compensation and a catastrophic type of illness or injury. So that's the real reason. It's the industry standard. And it's something that's it's an extremely valuable thing for our employees and also for our city to keep a safe and well workforce. So. Okay.
I already kind of felt that and knew that. Okay. And it is a proactive approach for the well-being and the health. Okay, let's go to I had two others. Joanne?
Lead maintenance workers. So utilization of Measure G money for positions is allowed. One of the, I think, inherent pieces in there is that I think there's a desire to use Measure G for projects. And so if Measure G is funding positions, even relatively small portions of positions in perpetuity, that is money that is not available for projects. And so one of the options that council could consider is to allocate Measure G, but have a progressive ramp down for those positions. For example, given our budget situation, council could approve it, but direct staff to, over a 5-year period, slowly ramp down the amount of Measure G that is being used for that position. And so you could sort of reduce it 20% each year, so the general fund will gradually pick up that cost. So at the 5-year mark, that cost is being borne by the general fund, not Measure G. This is an important need for that division, and to have more management personnel to supervise and plan the work. One of the challenges that we've had in that division or department without having the appropriate management personnel is it all falls on the director. From tree issues to planning proactive maintenance of our parks falls on the director's seat. And so we think it's appropriate to utilize a vacant position with the delta being funded by Measure G. But totally understand council's desire not to have positions funded in perpetuity by Measure G. And one approach would be to authorize it with the understanding that there will be a ramp down over a period of time, for example, 20% per year. So at the 5-year mark, that position is wholly covered by the city's general fund. And we can allow our normal revenue growth to slowly capture that. The next question was in regard to Microsoft Office. So is Steve Messick on? Or Sandeep?
Yeah, this is Steve. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, Steve, why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, Honorable Mayor, members of City Council, this is Steve Messick. I'm your IT manager. The enhancement expense for the Microsoft 365 licenses, that is an ongoing project. We started in the 2019-2020 budget year. We're slowly migrating all of the staff's computers and Windows to the Office 365. So the $5,000 and change is the additional licenses we need to complete that project, and we're scheduled to complete that at the end of 2020.
Okay, I think that's it for my questions. What I'm going to do is call on Marty, Laura, Linda, and then see if Michael has anything. And what I'd like, colleagues, is once you're done with your questions, just say, I'm concluded, and then if the next person will jump in. Marty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with, I'm sorry. I'm looking at two different screens here. So the fire department, that's for me a no-brainer. I think that's a good preventive cost. I'm not concerned about the price of having interns. I value that opportunity to bring somebody in. I just think the scope of what I'm reading in the page B1 of the summary of proposed budget enhancements, I don't think an intern is going to be able to do too much unless you get this amazing person. I'll leave it with that to hear the response to that. The question about the Measure G funds, that was a little bit of a surprise, but I would want to, of course, we have more time to think that through. I had a question about what were the senior center upgrades that were considered that are not included. And I guess the bigger thing I'm having a problem with Measure G is that we still haven't seated the oversight committee, and it was my understanding that they would get the first shot of the proposed expenditures, and they would then come back to us. I understand with COVID-19 it threw a big wrench, but I would like to hear a confirmation of when that committee will be seated, and I would urge for it to happen as soon as possible. I'm aware of Council Member Mason's requests for that seating and interviews to proceed, and I can't stress how important we need to move forward with that, and taking the applicants that are on hand and going another week would be sufficient to interview and seat that committee. So I'm done.
Thanks, Ronnie. Javon, did you want to respond before we move on to Laura?
Sure. The intern one, I think, Marty, I hear you, and that position will work with our planning and housing manager to have the right balance, but it will be helpful support. The senior center upgrades were cabling, a drop-down screen, additional speakers, and sort of around $44,000 of upgrades to make the technology of our meetings work more appropriately, and looking at pushing our regular meeting setup to that front half of the room, where if we have to expand for a larger crowd, we would just be opening the back half, where they're having to do sort of this full different setup if we have more people show up, right? Because in our normal setup, we're using the front half of the room, but if people show up, we don't have sort of an easy ability to flip a switch and expand the capacity. So it was reconfiguring some of our technology and where we would set up the stage on a regular basis. So for those large meetings, if the crowd expands, we sort of just open up the dividing door and more capacity. And to sort of not having VHS tape our solution to turning on and off the projector. But due to our budget issues, that was left on the cutting room floor. About Measure G, so we we did lose a potential applicant. I'm blanking on exactly how many applicants we have now, but the recruitment was extended to May 29th. The goal is to have city council interviews and seat the committee. And if there's time to get them seated and have interviews and a seating committee in June or before June 23rd, I think we would all love that. The other overarching comment that I think is important and may engender a little disagreement, but I think at the end of the day, in a perfect world, absolutely, right? We wanted that Measure G committee seated early on and for them to be advisory to the city council. And I was one that articulated for them not just to be a post oversight committee, but also to review the annual expenditures. There's sort of a litany of reasons on not just why the recruitment was extended this last time, but sort of why the interviews didn't happen earlier and finding dates and all of that. We find ourselves where we are. What I would also say is, at the end of the day, the Measure G committee is advisory to the city council. And if we are not able to seat that committee before a balanced budget needs to be adopted, I would ask the city council, at the end of the day, whatever they said was going to be advisory to you. And so if they say, no, we disagree with all of this, or no, we love all of this, the decision is in your lap to decide if the use of the $2 million in Measure G to help offset further reductions in staffing is appropriate. And you're using a portion for the enhancements that are proposed. That's not to say that the oversight board doesn't have value, but it's to say that we are where we are, and as the elected decision makers for this organization, the decision will be in your lap. I know that doesn't. I know that doesn't sort of make it okay for all of you that the committee is not seated right now. But we find ourselves in a position where we have an unprecedented fiscal recession on our hand. And as a part of the proposed budget, we're recommending using those funds.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Marty.
I just wanted to go ahead and follow up real quickly with that. City Manager Grogan, I appreciate the response. I agree. The ultimate decision is with the council. That is an advisory committee. I believe that the applications are due by this Friday, right? And with the ability to Zoom, we could schedule these interviews rather quickly. If need be, for instance, Peninsula Clean Energy, what they do is they have an ad hoc committee to interview and provide recommendations. But the main point is to get this advisory committee seated and move forward, right? So I'm in agreement with that part of it, and I'm just looking forward to getting that done as soon as possible. Thank you.
Yes, which I think the manager said June there should be not a problem. Laura.
Thank you. So, okay, my first question on the housing element of $100,000, is that for salary? I didn't understand that piece, that request. Although I know it's needed for making sure that we're fulfilling the RENA requirements.
It's a consultant. Darcy, are you on?
That's fine. That's what I wanted to understand. Okay. And then I guess that would be an ongoing cost too, because it's not just a 1 year process. It's gonna get us on point. So that's fine. You don't need to answer that. I don't need to go in and duplicate Measure G comments. So I think I am ditto the comments I already mentioned on Measure G. Senior Center. So the piece that got sort of left on the floor to not bring forward was the Senior Center improvements. But I know I've heard a couple comments about other council members interested in continuing the Zoom. Is that staff? Is staff feeling like this is something we can continue with? And based on that, we don't need to fill up a room, and hopefully we can keep sort of the setup that we have right now, because people can join by Zoom and stay in the comfort of their home on a rainy night, or taking care of kids. So, maybe the current setup is good. And if the current setup is good, are there some things that are some low-hanging fruits that we can improve? I mean, it's just so, I'm sure, Jovan, you came the first time and you just said, what? This is where we set up council meetings? I mean, we don't even have a city logo that sits behind us, or a presentation that you can provide on a monitor. It's on a projector screen that doesn't fit 9 times out of 10. I mean, flat screen TVs are pretty inexpensive. You can add a few of those around the room and look so much more professional. So are there anything that we can do that, in a minimal budget?
Yeah, I do think there's some low-hanging fruit that we can do. And what the setup post-COVID will be, I know that sort of you guys are thinking about that, we're thinking about that, the public is thinking about it. We really haven't gone there yet. We certainly get the desires, and we'll take that on as a task. The largest improvement that needs to be made there, so the quality of the video that we put on TV is better, is installing HD cameras and replacing a lot of the equipment in the back of the house that is, I don't know how old, but far past its useful life and its standard definition. The cost we had on that was actually $250,000, which is a ton, but not abnormal when you're talking about putting in a production studio where you can have someone produce the city council video where your name comes up when you talk, and the agenda is sequenced, so when someone is going in later on to look at a meeting online and they only want to see that 5th presentation down, they click that on the web and the video immediately goes there. Some of that sort of nice slick systems that other cities have. That sort of wasn't even considered. And so using Zoom as a way to provide online content to provide more access in perpetuity is one method. I think we have to ask and answer the question on, will we continue public comment via Zoom as well as in-person comment, or will Zoom essentially be like having the meeting streamed online where you can see it but you can't interact post-COVID? Because are we going to be monitoring both comments at home and comments live in the meeting? But I think those decisions are for later.
Okay, and then my final comment would be, I guess I'm kind of concerned about the whole mechanic thing. I mean, I've heard you talk about that a number of times, but I mean, do you offhand know how many vehicles we maintain in the city?
Dennis, are you on?
I am on. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good early afternoon, Mr. Mayor and Council. Vehicles and equipment total approximately 146.
So that's just a challenging thing for one employer, even 2 people to manage. So I'm assuming that a lot of the work is the coordination. Like, how do you ensure that vehicles are actually getting serviced in a timely manner? That, if you run a vehicle and you don't get it serviced, you don't get the oil changes on time, you're actually going to burn out engines and stuff like that. So definitely concerned about that department in that position. And I think it sounds like we kind of had this discussion last year around the same time about this department. But I think that we've got to put the either a better plan in place, either outsource this, because definitely 1 or 2 people is just not going to, that's a challenge in itself with 146 vehicles. And I guess, is there anybody else other than that one mechanic that's managing that process of ensuring registrations are complete, that vehicles are go through the maintenance, that the tires are checked, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh yeah, you actually asked several questions, so I'll try to hit them all. Basically, we've had, when you only have one mechanic in the garage, he's by himself, and so that's also somewhat of a concern, because most of the time, and as you some of you know, I've been here 30 years. This was the first time ever that we ever had the garage shut, in a sense, for more than a day, and there was many times. As to getting vehicles maintained, oil changes, yes, we have a management system that those vehicles come due, but then there's also vehicles that either have something wrong with them, or the police cars are driven almost 2 shifts in a row, so close to 20 hours a day. So the police cars take a lot of maintenance. We brought this up last year, and I think that there was some comments on, well, maybe we could have private shops work on. Well, with the police cars, it became a little bit of a security issue, because again, when we have our own mechanics, our own vehicles are the priority. When we bring them to outside shops, they were, well, you're going to get in line behind anybody else that we're working on, and then basically when the cars are done, you either have to pick them up right away, or then they're going to sit out on the city streets. And so it was a security concern for having our vehicles worked on at the local shops. Again, just specifically talking about the police cars, they're driven hard. They have a use for which they're intended, and it's for public safety, and so time is of the essence, and the police officers do the best they can to drive them safely. But at the end of the day, they're driven hard, and a lot of times, these vehicles are different than your normal passenger cars, and they receive wear and tear and or possible damage that happens during the course of their work. And those mechanics, I don't think, are necessarily, looking for those things. And so we had the issues with the police cars. Then, in a sense, just like several weeks ago, we had 5 cop cars down. And so when you only have one mechanic or 2 mechanics, or if something else happens that, you really can't plan for, we have to send someone for a DMV appointment, or let's say there's something happens personally and they have to take off, or the fact that anything else that could happen, or the police department isn't able or doesn't have the people during the day to come pick up the vehicles as quickly. It compounds. And so we got purchase orders to have Ceremony Ford work on our cars, but then you have to get them all the way up to Ceremony Ford, and they don't have a service to bring them back. So I could expand, but it basically, what it turns down to is we can't get to the vehicles quick enough, even doing the 90-day services on some of our public works vehicles or larger vehicles for the parks. Things then start backing up, and so it's been quite a challenge. Hopefully I got all to your questions.
You did an excellent job, and Dennis, thank you so much, because you really sort of painted a very clear picture. So I commend staff for dealing with this for the past year, and I think we need to figure out something, because I think having 5 police vehicles, that's not good, right? So.
No, and the one other question, I'm sorry, that you did ask was who's guaranteeing the registration and the purchasing of that all. As one of my roles as a deputy director, I am also the fleet manager, because years ago we had a fleet manager, but due to a financial downturn, the person retired. We never filled the position, and there are also challenges in dealing with DMV, I think, as we all know, living in California, and everything else that goes into that.
Yeah, it's a tremendous amount of work just managing that process. So kudos, because that's on top of everything else. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Linda?
So if I can jump in, and then Dennis just hit it, but I wanted to sort of expound on 5% of Dennis's time is allocated to fleet right now. And so right now, you have one mechanic and 0.05% of a person managing our fleet division right now.
Okay. Linda?
So, hi, I just had sorry, what is the total number of employees for the city? full-time?
267 or 265.
265. So the fleet, does the fleet maintenance fall completely under Public Works, or is there any shared responsibilities with other departments?
Public Works and Fire. So Fire does, our fire trucks are maintained by our firefighters, and there is a shop in the, what is it, 4th Bay, Fire Station 51, where they do a lot of the 30, 60-day, and there's an entire sort of conversation that can be had around how fire trucks are maintained and how we use Central County to do some of the larger work. But everything else is done by fleet.
Okay, so then of the 146 vehicles, are they used daily, or are any of them ready to be disposed of?
So all of those vehicles are in-service vehicles that are used. There are pool vehicles that are available to various departments. There are some vehicles that are assigned to individual departments. I think the larger question is that you're asking is, do we have the appropriate size fleet for organization size? And is there fleet creep, which means, you know, the size of the fleet keeps increasing, or do we need more vehicles? And so, Dennis, is there anything you can opine on that outside of me saying we need a fleet study?
Or I would actually also say, given the study that Keith gave earlier around the employee capacity actually going down over the years, it's more, my question is more, do we need less vehicles?
Yeah, I don't, so that's what I meant by a fleet study, because a fleet study will sort of do a full analysis on your fleet utilization. It looks at, for example, your pool vehicles and says, okay, you know what, you have this pool vehicle that's available for 3 departments, but there's only been 100 miles put on that vehicle a year. Maybe you don't need this vehicle. I don't know if that's the case here. I don't know when the last time we ever did a fleet study is, or what our sort of metrics is on our fleet utilization. But the real answer to your question is a significant analysis that is done periodically by fleet professionals that come in and take a holistic look at your fleet and give you metrics and recommendations.
Okay, and then would that fleet study also include, I know in various industries, there's a standard of how many, for example, inspections can be done a day. I come from a family of mechanics, so this is one area I am familiar with, but in the industry standard, how many cars would be fixed in a day, and what that standard is, I guess, for a city, as opposed to a private, for a private, you know, mom and pop shop.
Absolutely. So, I mean, the study will look at your shop. They'll look at wrenching hours. You know, you take an employee that has 2,080 hours back out for vacation time and training. You know, how many wrenching hours do they have in a year? They look at how you are managing ordering of supplies, how many supplies you keep on stock versus on-time ordering. It's a full complement analysis that's probably, to be done right, is around $50,000. Something we talked about doing, at least certainly over the 2 years that I've been here, but never done.
Yeah, I would just be curious to know, and is the mechanic the one stocking the parts? Is the mechanic the one ordering the parts? Is that the best use of the mechanic's time versus, you know, an administrative staff member? And I'll talk to you offline, Jovan, but I just have some suggestions on, I know what we did with our fleet at work. We kind of did a complete overhaul of what we had to save costs, but we can talk offline about that. As far as the analyst position, you kind of touched on it. That was something that a number of the directors expressed a need for. And I guess I'm just confused around why there was the analyst position wasn't one of the prioritized positions for planning. because we keep hearing over and over the importance of development for our revenue stream. I'm really happy to hear about the intern. I have worked with a number of incredible interns working on college degrees, master's degrees, who just have produced some pretty great work. So I'm really excited that that suggestion is being utilized. But I am a little confused on the analyst, because you've got the 3 other positions to help with maintenance. And I'm just wondering if any of those could be substituted for an analyst for planning, because we need, we really need some of these projects to continue moving, and we continue to hear that staff is at capacity, and that is the one department that can really generate revenue outside of city net services.
A totally fair comment. That the reason why it's not included is that it's unfortunately a reflection of the fiscal reality that we find ourselves in. I mean, I think we need analysts in every department. But the reality of our fiscal condition is we're in a reduction year, and so either we're going to cut services elsewhere to fund an analyst because we don't have general fund money for that position, or we're going to recommend utilizing Measure G for that analyst. And an analyst in planning, when we looked at sort of what the community priorities were, what was not on the list. There is an available balance from what we are appropriating from Measure G of a little over $400,000. And so if we wanted to look at using that for an analyst, I think, so directed, we can do that. The other positions are really critical needs to support essential parts of our operation. That because we're such a resource and personnel constrained organization, we have significant challenges just accomplishing the day-to-day. And last year's budget was sort of a reflection of that, where there were a number of needed positions that weren't recommended. And the few enhancements that were recommended were critical needs to support getting the day-to-day work done. But I mean, your point on needing an analyst is 110% correct.
Well, I think specifically the lead maintenance worker to park services manager, the reclassification of the parks and facilities manager to facilities and garage services manager. And for those of you who are watching later, I look over a lot because I'm looking at another screen and my budget binder. But I'm wondering if we need to reclassify both of the facilities manager to facilities and garage services manager. I don't know. I mean, I'm just thinking out loud, but is there a need for both reclassifications, and can we maybe change one of those to an analyst position? And then both departments get something, because the intern's going to be working on a very specific project, where I just think the analyst is just so crucial. It's so crucial, qualified analyst to a planning department.
So, unfortunately, I don't think that is a operational recommendation that will achieve the outcomes we need to support operations. And we can have Joanne, who's on, talk a little bit more about the challenges in community services for both the building not having a manager and then parks not having a manager as well. I mean, we need managers to supervise this work. That said, what you're talking about is unfortunately the zero-sum game that we've been at for a long time here, which is in order to get X, you have to pull from Y, right? You absolutely need the manager. I mean, the quality of our buildings, the lack of the preventative maintenance, the fact that this year we had the HVAC system in the police department go kaput and had liquid dripping on the servers in the police department, almost losing our critical public safety communications infrastructure because we didn't have preventative maintenance, and we have 2 building maintenance workers that are busy doing work orders, and there's no one planning doing preventative maintenance, right?
I just want to say I completely understand that. I'm just, I guess my question is, as far as how we're prioritizing, would one be able to get us funding at a quicker rate because of the asset that they would provide in the planning department that could then fund that management position within a year? You know, I'm not saying permanently. I'm just saying we've got to get money in here, and the department that is highly, you know, most likely to get that is going to be planning. And they were very clear that they need an analyst.
Yeah, I mean, does planning need an analyst? 110%. Is pulling the maintenance manager for our buildings or our parks the way to do that? I mean, my professional recommendation is no. And unfortunately, what we saw this year is literally the buildings are falling apart. Today, right now, we have an outside contractor remediating lead paint in the basement of City Hall because we had a portion of the basement ceiling fall in during our EOC activation because water intrusion of the concrete walkway in from the Linden side. And an analyst in community and economic development is needed. It will help us with this long game of improving development. But to do that at the expense of the recommended manager positions to plan and manage the work for critical infrastructure that is frankly falling apart is not professionally what I think we need. And the answer is we need both. And one of the solutions to that would be to utilize Measure G to fund that analyst position and have a 5-year ramp down in the Measure G funding so we can approve it today and ramp it down over 5 years, sort of 20%, 20%, 20%. But to not approve the manager positions and to pull that, I think is a zero-sum game that will have worse outcomes for us as a city.
I didn't know if Joanne wanted to say something. You can nod your head no. I don't know if there's something to add.
I would just like to expand a little bit on the parks manager role and go over a few of the projects that this person would be responsible for. So the new Rec and Aquatic Center is scheduled to break ground in potentially January of 2021. City Parkway will be closed. Construction will occur in the park, and we need someone to help coordinate and facilitate that, as well as the Florida Park project, which we will move forward with launching that area, as well as Tom Lara Field grandstands renovations, fire mitigation, routine fire mitigation, that requires 3 quotes from 3 different companies to come out and give us estimates. ADA transition in the parks for year 2. This person would also assist with the budget, which is kind of a management analyst task, as well as staff evaluations, put together a routine for maintenance of the medians, coordinate our West Coast Arborist contract, coordinating all their annual work, which they service hundreds of trees, and we have to check the invoices, make sure that they're pruning and pollarding the trees correctly, making sure the setbacks are correct, the tree types are correct in our inventory of over 6,700 trees. And then any kind of large tree removals that are outside the scope of what the staff can facilitate are coordinated. And again, we need proof if we need to go out, if they're over $5,000 outside of the scope of the West Coast Arborist contract. So those are just some of the things that this role would assist with.
Joanne, can you talk a little bit about contracts and our vendor contracts and the lack of management and oversight of our vendor contracts? Because we essentially have people doing the work, but no one managing and planning the work.
So when I arrived here, we had minimal contracts on file, including fire sprinkler maintenance and inspections on a quarterly and annual basis. We have an expired contract for our generators. We don't have routine maintenance contracts for our HVAC systems. So, but that takes a human being to actually get 3 quotes and put the information together. We also were lacking on insurance and business licenses, and we deal with about 60 vendors. So that's where we started. We started by reaching out to all these different companies that the city was working with to establish insurance on file and a business license. But we're slowly getting up to speed on getting all of those contracts established. And it's really a result of kind of just dealing with the HVAC at the senior center went out yesterday. And we had a council meeting up there, so we needed to get that fixed. We had a bird problem in the rec center where the windows broke and the windows wouldn't retract. And so it's just, you can't get quotes if you have one person managing all those things. So that's the difficulty.
Okay. Okay, and then just thank you for that. And then just a comment, echoing what I said last night is, Measure G has been kind of an interesting place for me to make a decision on. And hold on one second. But I think that for really this to be part of this budget, for my approval, there really does need to be an oversight committee. I actually just looked it up last night. This was brought up to us on January 14th. There have been conversations around this. I have sent emails around this. We have 7 people right now. We had people ready to interview. It's still unknown why those interviews were canceled, why the applications were opened again. I think it's really important that we have an oversight committee in place at the time that this budget's requested to be approved and that they've provided some comments.
I don't know what she said the first time to that kid, but I got to figure out. That was great. Okay.
Do you have anything to respond to the following by Linda, or are we good?
No, I think we're good. I think we're all in agreement that let's have the interviews and get the oversight committee scheduled as soon as possible. Thank you.
As you indicated, yes, it's Friday, and I believe it wasn't just for Measure G, but all of the committee commissions and boards were extended, open, trying to make one more push with COVID and everything else that, like Marty indicated, that where we're at, but the objective was to have it, like you said, in place, interviewed in June. Excuse me. And Michael, we hadn't heard from you. Did you have anything before I go to Laura?
A question on the housing element update. The ongoing cost is ongoing for 2 years only?
Darcy, are you on?
Yes. Hi. I'm on. Nice to see you, Honorable Mayor and City Council members. So the bulk of the housing element work will be next fiscal year. The deadline for adoption currently is December 2022. I should mention that the state, or I should say the counties, are having conversations with the state to potentially get an extension of that because of the COVID-19 emergency. But as of right now, the bulk of the work would happen next fiscal year with a little bit in the following fiscal year. And there is no ongoing costs other than the implementation, which right now the state is requiring all housing element identified housing sites to be rezoned as part of the housing element, which is why there's an added cost.
Okay. Thank you. And regarding the Measure G, I'm also really uncomfortable with funding a salary from Measure G, but I understand that these are unusual circumstances and 43,000 is not huge, but I feel a lot better if maybe this was a one-time allocation of Measure G funds rather than something that we're saying we could ramp down or it's an ongoing thing. And, like I said, these are unusual times and we, as hesitant as I am to just say, go forth and do it, I realize that the money's got to come from somewhere, and this is a pretty modest ask. And I would just say that if we could make it a one-time or maybe 2 fiscal years where we fund it from this, and then find another funding source once things stabilize, that might be better. I'm less concerned about the oversight committee in that it is an advisory committee, and I feel very strongly that we need to find good candidates and not really rush into trying to create a committee. So if it took a little longer to gather some some more applicants and we'll have a better pool of people to pick from. I think that is a better alternative. So I'm less concerned as long as, you know, the council is perfectly transparent about what we're doing, that, I think we've been very clear that we understand what the public's intent was. We understand how this was marketed, and we're making a very conscious effort where we deviate from that to acknowledge that we are deviating and that we're being open, we're being transparent. And I think that's really the spirit of having that oversight committee would be to give us that level of transparency. So if we can maintain that level of transparency and still move forward with this, I'm comfortable with doing that. And we definitely need to do it as soon as possible, but I don't want us to sacrifice the quality of that process to try to rush through it. And then finally, on the technology piece, I'm wondering if there are any other anticipated costs that might come from working in the new normal, where perhaps staff might be required to work remotely more often. Did we incur a lot of costs for new equipment, for laptops, so that people could work from home? Are there any security enhancements that we need for people accessing the systems remotely? Whether that's on the firewall or other security enhancements. If we're allowing people to use their own machines at home, are we providing software for them to use on their personal computers, including antivirus and any kind of productivity suite type software?
Okay. As far as the IT items for COVID or remote meetings, we did need to purchase a number of pieces of equipment that have been paid for out of the emergency reserve. And those, I don't know the number offhand, a few TVs and laptops and webcams. So those are already captured in the figures of what COVID is costing us. I don't know that there are any immediate additional IT expenses. I can ask Steve if you're on the line, or Sandeep if you have anything. Feel free to pipe in, but nothing comes to mind for me.
Honorable Mayor, members of City Council, Steve Messick, your IT manager. At this point, we are well equipped for dealing with the daily COVID situation with the workers at home. I do not see any additional expenses that we need. We did not spend that much. We had to buy some additional security licenses to protect people's desktops at home, and some additional VPN communication licenses so they could connect to our internal network. Luckily we've been upgrading laptops over the last year, so we did not have to buy a lot of laptops and expensive equipment. We were in pretty good shape.
Okay.
Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that answers it. Thank you.
Okay, we're at 12:05. I have Laura, Marty, Linda, and if we can keep the questions succinct so we can try to get through, because we are a little behind, but certainly questions are great. So hopefully if you can keep it succinct, and hopefully it's not a back and forth on a topic. But Laura, then Marty, then Linda.
Thank you. Just wanted to make a couple comments. Number one, the 43,000. I thought about that when I heard Javon make that comment about possibly a 5-year plan, reducing it over time. I'd have a much easier time supporting it if it was just one time versus, and then we do as we move forward over the years. And the oversight committee, I just want to say that, we have to trust staff on this. There's been many a times in the past we have extended the window because we just didn't get enough candidates, and I think we need to do it right versus rushing in anything. And so I don't have any concerns, and I support really what we've done. So that was all.
Marty?
Yes, sir. Just following up on that senior center upgrades, is it the lower hanging fruit is perhaps staff can contact the endowment, the funds there, and see how that would work to improve the overall experience at the senior center, similar to what was done for the potential restriping of the senior center. So that would be my suggestion there. And I want to be able to provide our city manager with the flexibility in the community development department with the planner or the analyst, the person providing the funding to do what is necessary to get a project out the door. I'll leave it at that. Perhaps we could talk about more of that later. I know we're a little over time, so those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. Linda?
Hi, so I just wanted to say that I did request all of the mailers that went out for Measure G. It says very clearly here that Measure G includes strict accountability provisions, including independent citizens oversight, and requires mandatory financial audits and yearly reports to the community to ensure the funds are spent appropriately. So, I think that using the Measure G funds in this emergency situation is kind of one part that I'm already struggling with. But I think not having an independent oversight committee when that is what was guaranteed in all the Measure G mailings that I've seen that were provided to me is a whole other issue around marketing. And to me, it's an issue that will affect us long term. It's what was promised to the voters. And if we do want bond measures to be passed in the future for other projects, we really need to be true to what was sent out. So I just want to make that really clear. And I also want to say that this meeting is the first that I have heard from Councilmember Salazar and Councilmember Davis that the people who submitted their applications were not qualified. And I would love to hear what the qualifications are for this role because I had not heard that prior to this. Thank you.
I didn't quite hear the word qualified. And I think anybody who wants to give up their time is qualified in this community because that means they care. That's the bottom line. So. Okay, no.
Mayor, if I could just clarify one point, I have not seen a single application that came in, so I'm not making any judgment on any applications that came in. I'm merely saying that the bigger the pool we have, the more likely we are to have more qualified candidates. So I just wanted to correct that.
Okay, thank you. We have 12:10 on that. What I'm going to do, if staff is okay, let's say we reconvene at 1 o'clock. So that's a 50-minute break in lieu of the hour, just to try to make up a little about that, and then we'll start in the general fund. Javon, is that okay? Javon?
Perfect, yes.
Okay, let's then reconvene at 1 o'clock. Thank you.